Emily tapped her pen against the page, her brow furrowed. If we cut back on groceries next month, we can cover the heating bill, she said softly. Robert frowned. But what about the kids' presents? I don't want him to miss out. Emily placed a hand on his arm. We'll figure it out. We always do. You've already done so much, Robert said, his voice filled with gratitude. I don't know how you manage it all. Emily smiled. Because it's worth it. They're worth it. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. They gave up so much for us. The golden light shimmered again, transporting the siblings to another moment in time. This one was set in the kitchen, where Emily was carefully wrapping leftover sandwiches in foil. Little Ethan walked in, rubbing his eyes. Mommy, why are you still awake? Emily quickly smiled, hiding the exhaustion in her face. Just getting things ready for tomorrow, sweetheart. Go back to bed. But you're tired, young Ethan said, frowning. I'm okay, Emily assured him, kneeling to his level. You know why? Why? Because making you happy makes me happy, she said, kissing his forehead. The older Ethan felt his chest tighten. He hadn't remembered this moment until now. The Lonely Christmas. Chapter 1. The Lonely Christmas. The living room felt unusually cold, even though the fireplace crackled softly. Strings of white fairy lights were draped over the mantel, and a Christmas tree stood in the corner, its ornaments shimmering in the dim light. Yet, despite the festive decorations, the atmosphere was anything but cheerful. Ethan sat slouched on the couch, scrolling through his phone, his face a mixture of boredom and annoyance. His younger brother Liam leaned against the armrest, staring blankly at the television that was playing a Christmas movie neither of them was watching. Grace was perched on the floor, untangling a strand of lights with half-hearted effort. I can't believe they're not coming, Grace muttered, breaking the silence. They always find some excuse, Liam replied bitterly. Last year, it was Dad's work. The year before, it was Mom's health. Now they're conveniently stuck abroad. Ethan sighed, tossing his phone onto the coffee table. It's like they don't even care anymore. Christmas used to mean something to them, to all of us. Grace looked up, her eyes clouded with sadness. Do you think they've just moved on, forgotten about us? Ethan rubbed his temples. They've had plenty of opportunities to prove otherwise, haven't they? But every year, it's the same story. Promises broken, excuses made. I'm tired of it. The room fell silent again, the only sound coming from the faint hum of the TV. It was hard for the siblings to reconcile the parents they had once idolized with the distant figures they had become. The Clark siblings had grown up in a warm, loving home, or at least, that's how they remembered it. Their parents, Robert and Emily, had always made Christmas magical when they were kids. From handmade stockings to carefully chosen gifts, every detail had been planned with love. But as the years passed and life got busier, things began to change. Robert's work required frequent travel, and Emily's health issues kept her from being as present as she used to be. What had once been a close-knit family now felt like a group of individuals living separate lives. This year, Robert and Emily were stuck abroad due to unforeseen circumstances. A severe snowstorm had grounded all flights, leaving them stranded in Europe. They had called earlier in the day, apologizing profusely and promising to celebrate together once they returned. But the siblings weren't convinced. They always have a way out, don't they? Liam said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Grace, who had been holding on to some hope, finally snapped. Maybe we're just not important enough to them anymore. Ethan stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered street. You know what's funny? I can't even remember the last time we all sat down together for a meal, let alone celebrated anything as a family. They're always too busy or too far away. Yeah, and they expect us to just understand, Liam added. But what about us? We're the ones left behind every time. The three of them went about decorating the house, but the task felt more like a chore than a celebration. They hung ornaments on the tree, strung lights around the windows, and set up the nativity scene on the mantelpiece, all while exchanging half-hearted remarks. Grace paused to adjust a crooked angel on the tree. Remember when Mom used to make us sing carols while we decorated? Ethan chuckled, though there was no humor in it. Yeah, and Dad would film everything. pretending he was making some Oscar-worthy documentary. Liam smirked. And he'd always end up dropping the camera or filming his own feet. The memories brought a fleeting warmth to the room, but it was quickly overshadowed by the present reality. They were different back then, Grace said quietly. They cared more. Or maybe we just imagined they did, Ethan replied, his tone harsh. Grace glared at him. Don't say that. They're still our parents. Are they? Ethan shot back. Because the people they've become feel more like strangers. As the evening wore on, the siblings settled into their usual routines. Ethan retreated to his room, Liam played video games, and Grace curled up with a book. The house felt emptier than ever, despite their presence. Later, as they gathered for a simple dinner of leftovers, the conversation turned back to their parents. You know, Liam began, I used to think Christmas was their favorite time of year. They always went all out, decorations, food, everything. It was, Grace said. But that was when we were kids. Maybe they think we've outgrown it now. Ethan stabbed at his food with a fork. Or maybe they've outgrown us. Grace sighed. I hate feeling like this. Like we're just forgotten. Well, it's not like we have much choice, Liam said. We can't force them to care. Ethan leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. Maybe it's time we stop expecting anything from them. That way, we won't be disappointed anymore. After dinner, they sat together in the living room, the glow of the Christmas tree casting soft shadows on their faces. It was a quiet moment, filled with unspoken emotions. Grace broke the silence. Do you think they're sitting somewhere right now, thinking about us? Liam shrugged. Maybe. But thinking isn't the same as being here, is it? Ethan, ever the realist, said, look, they've made the choices. We just have to accept it and move on. But deep down, none of them truly believed that. They wanted to feel loved, wanted to feel like they mattered. And as much as they tried to convince themselves otherwise, the absence of their parents stung deeply. As the clock struck midnight, marking the start of Christmas Day, the siblings exchanged weary glances. Merry Christmas, Grace said softly, her voice tinged with sadness. Merry Christmas, Liam and Ethan replied in unison, their words carrying the weight of disappointment. The night stretched on, quiet and lonely, as the siblings sat together, each lost in their own thoughts. Little did they know that this Christmas would bring them something far greater than the physical presence of their parents. It would bring them the gift of understanding, love, and a glimpse into the past that would change everything. If you like this story, then please like the video and subscribe the channel. Comment your views about this story. Chapter 2. A magical encounter. The night had grown colder, and a gentle snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in silence. Inside, the mood was no warmer. Ethan, Liam, and Grace sat in the dimly lit living room, the glow of the Christmas tree reflecting their weary expressions. I'm telling you, this is the worst Christmas ever, Liam grumbled, slouching in his seat. Grace sighed. Do we have to keep talking about it? It's not like complaining will change anything. Ethan, pacing near the window, shot her a look. Why shouldn't we talk about it? They're our parents, Grace. They should be here, but they're not. Again. Grace frowned. And what do you want me to do about it, Ethan? Build a plane and go get them. Maybe stop defending them all the time, Ethan snapped. I'm not defending them. Grace's voice rose. I just don't see the point of sitting here and sulking all night. Well, maybe you should. Before Ethan could finish, a strange noise interrupted him. It wasn't the usual creak of the old house or the wind rattling the windows. It was a low hum, almost melodic, and it seemed to vibrate through the air. Did you hear that? Liam asked, sitting up straighter. Grace glanced around nervously. What was that? Ethan stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. Probably just the heater acting up again. But as the hum grew louder, the room began to change. The lights on the Christmas tree flickered and dimmed, casting long shadows on the walls. The air seemed to shimmer, like heat rising off pavement, and a warm, golden glow began to envelop the room. Ah, guys, Liam said, his voice shaking. I don't think this is the heater. The siblings stood frozen, watching as the glow intensified, wrapping around them like a cocoon. The room seemed to spin, the furniture blurring and shifting. What's happening? Grace cried, clutching Ethan's arm. I don't know, Ethan shouted, shielding his eyes from the blinding light. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the light vanished. The room fell silent, and for a moment, everything seemed normal again. But it wasn't. When the siblings opened their eyes, they were no longer standing in the dim, modern living room they knew. Instead, they found themselves in a brightly lit, cheerfully decorated space that seemed oddly familiar. The scent of freshly baked cookies wafted through the air, mingling with the rich aroma of hot cocoa. What the? Ethan began, but his voice trailed off as he looked down at himself. His hands were tiny, his clothes loose and childish. What's going on? Grace gasped. Ethan, you're a kid. Ethan stared at his reflection in a nearby window. The face staring back at him was his own, but younger, much younger. Liam let out a startled laugh. Ethan, you look like a little boy. Wait, why do my hands look so small? Grace glanced at her own reflection, her eyes wide. She was barely taller than the couch now, her once long hair tied up in messy pigtails. This isn't possible, she whispered. I'm a kid, too. What is happening? Ethan demanded, his small fists clenched. Before they could process what was going on, the sound of laughter and cheerful voices drew their attention. They turned toward the source and froze. It was their parents. Robert and Emily stood in the kitchen, looking younger and happier than the siblings had seen them in years. Robert was wearing a goofy Santa hat, while Emily was carefully frosting a batch of cookies. They were laughing and teasing each other, their love for one another evident in their every gesture. Mom, Dad, Grace whispered, her voice trembling. They look different, Liam said, his eyes wide. They look happy, Ethan muttered, his chest tightening. As they stood there, stunned, another voice broke through the air. Mommy, can we decorate the cookies now? The siblings turned toward the voice, and their jaws dropped. It was Ethan, his 7-year-old self, bounding into the kitchen with a grin that stretched from ear to ear. Behind him came a 5-year-old Liam, dragging a stuffed reindeer, and a tiny 4-year-old Grace, holding a glittery ornament in her small hands. This can't be real, present-day Ethan said, his voice barely audible. It's us, Grace whispered. This is our past. The siblings watched in awe as their younger selves interacted with their parents. Little Ethan climbed onto a stool to help frost the cookies, while little Liam carefully arranged sprinkles on a tray. Young Grace toddled over to the tree, placing her ornament on a low branch with great concentration. Be careful, sweetie, Emily said, her voice filled with warmth. That's a special one. Robert chuckled, ruffling little Liam's hair. And don't eat all the sprinkles before they make it to the cookies. I'm not, little Liam protested, though his chocolate-covered mouth betrayed him. The older siblings exchanged glances, their hearts aching with a mix of emotions. Do you see how happy they were? Grace said, tears welling up in her eyes. Yeah, Ethan admitted, his voice soft. I'd forgotten they were like this. Liam, usually the jokester, was uncharacteristically quiet. They really loved us, didn't they? As the scene unfolded, the siblings saw moments they hadn't thought about in years. The way the parents worked together to make every detail perfect. The way the dad joked and played with them, even when he was tired. The way their mom sang softly as she baked, her voice filling the house with warmth. It was a version of their family they hadn't seen in a long time, and it made the current reality feel all the more painful. They were so present, Grace said, her voice breaking. When did that change? Ethan shook his head. I don't know, but maybe it wasn't them that changed. Maybe it was us. Liam frowned. What do you mean? I mean, look at him, Ethan said, gesturing to their parents. They're doing everything they can to make us happy. Maybe they've always been doing that. We just stopped noticing. The golden glow returned, wrapping around them once more. The room began to spin, the cheerful scene fading into a blur of light and color. When the siblings opened their eyes, they were back in the present, sitting in the dimly lit living room. Was that real? Grace asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan looked down at his hands, now full-sized again. I think it was. Liam stared at the Christmas tree, his mind racing. But why? Why did we see that? Ethan met his gaze. Maybe it was a reminder to show us what we've been missing. Grace wiped a tear from her cheek. Maybe it's not too late to get it back. The siblings sat in silence, the weight of what they had just experienced settling over them. The night wasn't over, and Christmas still held the promise of something magical. Please like the video and subscribe the channel. Chapter 3. Christmas Through Tiny Eyes. The golden glow receded, leaving Ethan, Liam, and Grace standing in their family home, but it wasn't quite as they remembered it. The room seemed brighter, cozier, and more alive. Garland wrapped the banisters, twinkling with tiny golden lights. The Christmas tree stood proudly in the corner, its branches heavy with handmade ornaments and colorful ribbons. The smell of cinnamon and pine filled the air. Everything seemed bigger. Is it just me, or is this house enormous? Liam asked, his voice high-pitched. Grace giggled. It's not the house, Liam. Look at yourself. Liam glanced down and yelped, realizing his hands were tiny, his feet clad in fuzzy reindeer slippers. Oh no, we're still kids. Ethan, now a 7-year-old, looked at his reflection in the shiny surface of an ornament. This is so weird, but it's kind of amazing. Before they could discuss it further, their parents entered the room. Robert was carrying a stack of presents, his sweater dusted with snow, while Emily followed with a tray of steaming hot cocoa. Their faces were alight with joy, their laughter echoing through the house. There's my little helpers, Robert exclaimed, setting the gifts down. Who's ready to decorate the tree? The siblings watched in awe as their younger selves came running into the room. Little Ethan immediately began untangling a string of lights, his tongue sticking out in concentration. Young Liam grabbed a box of ornaments, his excitement causing him to spill them across the floor. Grace, barely 4 years old, toddled over with a plush snowman in her tiny hands. It's so weird seeing myself like this, Liam muttered. Was I always this clumsy? You were adorable, Grace teased, nudging him. Robert knelt beside little Liam, helping him pick up the scattered ornaments. Careful, buddy, these are your mom's favorites. Emily smiled, handing little Grace a soft angel ornament. Here you go, sweetheart. Why don't you put this one on the tree? Young Grace beamed, carefully placing the angel on the lowest branch. Ethan's heart clenched as he watched the scene. They were so patient with us. So happy. The room buzzed with activity as the family worked together to decorate the tree. Robert lifted young Liam onto his shoulders so he could place the star at the top, while Emily taught little Ethan how to wrap the lights evenly. Daddy, is Santa really coming tonight? Little Grace asked, her wide eyes full of wonder. Of course he is, Robert replied, winking. But only if you're asleep when he gets here. Emily chuckled. And if you don't eat all the cookies before he does? Little Grace giggled, clapping her hands. The older Grace felt tears prick her eyes. I'd forgotten how magical they made everything feel. They worked so hard to make us happy, Ethan added. I wish I'd appreciated it more. ... As the decorations were finished, Emily called everyone to the kitchen. The siblings followed, watching as their younger selves eagerly helped their parents bake cookies. The counters were dusted with flour, and the air was filled with the smell of sugar and chocolate. Ethan, can you pour the sprinkles? Emily asked, her voice gentle but encouraging. Little Ethan nodded solemnly, taking the task very seriously. I'll make them perfect, Mom. Liam laughed at the sight. Wow, I really was the messy one. You still are, Ethan teased. Robert leaned against the counter, watching his family with a proud smile. I think these might be the best cookies yet. Only because we're helping, little Liam declared, his face smeared with frosting. The siblings chuckled at the sight, their hearts swelling with a mixture of joy and longing. After the cookies were baked and the kitchen was cleaned, the family gathered in the living room for a tradition the siblings had nearly forgotten, storytelling by the fire. Robert sat in his favorite armchair, holding a well-worn copy of The Night Before Christmas. The children piled onto the rug in front of him, their eyes shining with anticipation. Emily sat nearby, knitting a scarf and chiming in with humorous commentary. 'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house, Robert began, his voice animated and warm. As he read, The siblings noticed details they hadn't appreciated before. The way Emily's eyes sparkled as she listened, the way Robert's voice rose and fell dramatically, the way the younger versions of themselves leaned in, utterly captivated. "We had everything we needed back then," Grace whispered. "Yeah," Ethan agreed. "And they gave it to us." The night ended with their parents tucking the younger selves into bed. "Good night, my little stars," Emily said, kissing each child on the forehead. "Don't forget to dream big," Robert added, pulling the blankets snugly around them. As their parents turned out the light and left the room, the siblings stood in the corner, watching the younger selves drift off to sleep. "They called us their stars," Grace said softly. "They still do," Ethan reminded her. "Maybe we stopped listening," Liam added, his voice tinged with regret. The golden glow returned, wrapping around the siblings once more. They braced themselves as the room spun, the past dissolving into light. When they opened their eyes, they were back in the present, standing in their dimly lit living room. For a moment, none of them spoke. The memories they had just witnessed were too fresh, too overwhelming. "They loved us so much," Grace finally said, her voice trembling. "And they still do," Ethan added. "We just forgot." Liam nodded, his usual humor replaced with sincerity. "Maybe it's time we remember." The siblings sat together on the couch, the warmth of their past lingering in their hearts. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside, the coldness between them had melted away. Christmas wasn't over yet, and they were determined to make it one to remember. Please like the video and subscribe the channel. Comment your views about this video. Chapter 4. The Forgotten Sacrifices. The golden light returned, swirling around the siblings as they found themselves pulled into another memory. This time, the glow faded to reveal a different scene. It wasn't as cheerful as the Christmas mornings they had just witnessed. Instead, the house was quiet, the atmosphere heavier, though the warmth of love was still present. Ethan, Liam, and Grace stood in the corner of the living room, unnoticed, as their parents entered. Robert had dark circles under his eyes, and Emily's shoulders were tense as she balanced a stack of bills in one hand and a mug of tea in the other. "Is this after we went to bed?" Grace asked, her voice hesitant. "I think so," Ethan replied, frowning. Robert sank into the couch, loosening his tie with a sigh. "Another late night," he muttered, his voice tired. Emily sat beside him, flipping through the stack of envelopes. "I know, but we're almost through the worst of it. The kids won't even notice." "They shouldn't have to," Robert said firmly. "This is on us. Their Christmas has to be perfect." Emily nodded, a soft smile breaking through her exhaustion. "You're right. It always is. Did you see their faces when they opened the advent calendar this morning?" Liam was so excited he spilled half the chocolates. Robert chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah," and Ethan went on and on about how he's going to bake the best cookies ever. Grace wouldn't stop hugging that stuffed snowman you got her. The older siblings watched, their hearts sinking. "They were so tired," Grace whispered. "And they still made time for us," Liam added. The scene shifted slightly, revealing their parents huddled over a notebook filled with scribbles. Emily tapped her pen against the page, her brow furrowed. "If we cut back on groceries next month, we can cover the heating bill," she said softly. Robert frowned. "But what about the kids' presents? I don't want him to miss out." Emily placed a hand on his arm. "We'll figure it out. We always do." "You've already done so much," Robert said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I don't know how you manage it all." Emily smiled. "Because it's worth it. They're worth it." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. They gave up so much for us. The golden light shimmered again, transporting the siblings to another moment in time. This one was set in the kitchen, where Emily was carefully wrapping leftover sandwiches in foil. Little Ethan walked in, rubbing his eyes. "Mommy, why are you still awake?" Emily quickly smiled, hiding the exhaustion in her face. "Just getting things ready for tomorrow, sweetheart. Go back to bed." "But you're tired," young Ethan said, frowning. "I'm okay," Emily assured him, kneeling to his level. "You know why." "Why?" "Because making you happy makes me happy," she said, kissing his forehead. The older Ethan felt his chest tighten. He hadn't remembered this moment until now. The scene shifted again, this time showing Robert in the garage, repairing a broken sled. His hands were covered in grease, his brow furrowed with concentration. Little Liam stood nearby, holding a flashlight. "Is it gonna work, Daddy?" young Liam asked, his voice full of hope. "It'll work, buddy," Robert said, his tone resolute. "It might take a little extra effort, but we'll get it done. Why don't we just buy a new one?" Robert paused, glancing at his son. "Because sometimes it's not about buying something new. It's about taking care of what you have and making it special." Liam, now an adult, swallowed hard. "I didn't realize. They taught us more than we thought," Grace said softly. The siblings watched as more moments from their childhood played out before them. They saw Emily sewing patches onto worn clothes late into the night, her fingers moving deftly despite her fatigue. They saw Robert working extra hours, his coat dusted with snow as he trudged home in the early morning. They saw their parents skipping meals to make sure the kids had enough to eat, and saying no to their own wants so they could say yes to their children's wishes. Every action was a quiet sacrifice, unnoticed by the younger versions of Ethan, Liam, and Grace. "They never told us," Grace whispered. "They just did it. They didn't want us to worry," Ethan said, his voice heavy with guilt. "They wanted us to have a childhood filled with joy. And we took it for granted," Liam added, his head bowed. The golden glow returned, bringing them to yet another memory. This time, it was Christmas morning. Little Ethan, Liam, and Grace tore through their presents with squeals of delight. Robert and Emily sat on the couch, their arms around each other, watching with tired but content smiles. "Thank you, Mommy. Thank you, Daddy," little Grace cried, hugging her new doll. "You're the best," young Liam added, waving a toy plane. Young Ethan looked up at his parents, his face glowing with happiness. "How did you get all this for us?" Robert chuckled. "Santa helped out a bit." Emily leaned down, cupping young Ethan's cheek. "We'd do anything for you three. Always remember that." The older siblings stood in silence, the words hitting them like a wave. "They meant it," Ethan said, his voice barely audible. "They always did," Grace replied, wiping away a tear. As the glow surrounded them once more, the siblings returned to the present, their hearts heavy with emotion. The living room was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the heater and the occasional crackle of the fireplace. "They sacrificed so much for us," Liam said, breaking the silence. "And we never really saw it," Grace added, her voice trembling. Ethan nodded. "But we see it now. And it's not too late to show them we understand." The siblings sat together, reflecting on the love and sacrifices that had shaped their lives. The warmth of those memories filled the room, softening the distance they had felt for so long. This Christmas, they promised themselves, would be different. Please like the video and subscribe the channel. Chapter 5. Coming home for Christmas. The golden glow faded for the final time, leaving Ethan, Liam, and Grace back in their living room. The cozy warmth of the fire flickered gently, as if nothing had happened. Yet everything had changed. Ethan looked around, his heart still racing from the emotional journey they had just experienced. The quiet house now felt less lonely and more like a treasure trove of memories. "Was that real?" Liam asked, breaking the silence. Grace wiped a tear from her cheek. "It felt real, every second of it." Ethan nodded, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "It was real enough to remind us of something we'd forgotten. How much our parents love us. How much they've always loved us." The siblings sat down together on the couch, their hearts heavy with guilt and gratitude. "I feel awful," Grace admitted, her voice trembling. "All this time, we've been blaming them, thinking they didn't care. But they were always there for us in ways we didn't even notice." "They gave up so much," Liam said quietly, "so we could have everything. And we just took it for granted." Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "We've been so focused on what we thought we were missing that we didn't see what they gave us. But it's not too late to fix this." Grace looked up, her eyes shining with determination. "We have to call them. Right now." Ethan grabbed his phone, his hands shaking slightly. He dialed their parents' number, the ringing echoing in the silent room. After a few moments, their father's familiar voice answered. "Ethan, is everything okay?" Robert's voice was warm but tinged with concern. Ethan swallowed hard. Hi, Dad. Yeah, everything's okay. We just wanted to talk to you and Mom. There was a pause, then the faint sound of Emily's voice in the background. Robert, who is it? It's Ethan, Robert replied, before speaking into the phone again. Your mom's here. Let me put you on speaker. Ethan exchanged a glance with Liam and Grace, who both nodded encouragingly. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad, Ethan said, his voice softer now. Hi, sweetheart, Emily replied, her tone warm. How are you three doing? We've been thinking about you all day. Grace let out a small gasp, tears welling in her eyes. You have? Of course we have, Robert said. We're so sorry we couldn't be there with you this Christmas. It's been tearing us up inside. Ethan cleared his throat, trying to steady his emotions. Actually, we're the ones who should be apologizing. We've been so unfair to you. What do you mean? Emily asked, her voice filled with concern. Liam took over, his usual humor replaced with sincerity. We've been blaming you for being away, for feeling distant, but it's not your fault. We've been so focused on what we thought was missing that we didn't see everything you've done for us. Grace's voice broke as she added, we saw it, Mom. Dad, we remembered everything you gave up for us. All the love you put into making our lives special. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line before Robert spoke, his voice thick with emotion. Oh, kids, you don't know how much it means to hear you say that. Emily's voice was soft but steady. We never wanted you to feel unloved. Everything we did was for you. The siblings felt a weight lift from their shoulders as they poured their hearts out, sharing their newfound understanding and gratitude. They laughed through tears as they recounted their childhood memories, the sacrifices they had seen, and the love they had rediscovered. You were always our stars, Emily said, her voice full of warmth. And you always will be. And you're ours, Ethan replied, his voice breaking. The call ended with promises to celebrate together soon, but the conversation left the siblings feeling closer to their parents than they had in years. Liam leaned back, letting out a deep sigh. That felt really good. Grace nodded, a small smile on her lips. It's amazing how much can change when you just talk to each other. Ethan stood, glancing at the clock. It's not too late to make this Christmas special. Let's do something to show them how much they mean to us. What are you thinking? Liam asked, intrigued. Ethan grinned. Let's create something that reminds them of all those Christmases we spent together. Something to show them that we remember, and that we're still their stars. The siblings sprang into action, gathering decorations, baking cookies, and setting up the living room. They found old family ornaments and placed them on the tree, carefully arranging them just as their parents used to. Grace baked a fresh batch of cookies using their mom's recipe, the familiar smell filling the house. Liam set up a makeshift fireplace on their TV screen, complete with crackling logs. Ethan found an old recording of the night before Christmas that the dad had read years ago and played it softly in the background. By the time they were done, the living room glowed with the same warmth and love they had felt in their childhood memories. As they sat together, admiring their work, Grace spoke up. Do you think they'll feel it? The love we put into this? Ethan smiled. I think they already do. Liam raised his mug of cocoa. To Mom and Dad, and to Christmas. The siblings clinked their mugs together, the warmth of the moment wrapping around them like a blanket. That night, as they settled in to watch an old Christmas movie, their hearts were full. They had rediscovered not just the spirit of Christmas, but the unbreakable bond that tied them to their parents, no matter the distance. Love, they realized, wasn't about being physically present all the time. It was about the sacrifices, the memories, and the unspoken moments that shaped their lives. As snow fell softly outside, the siblings drifted off to sleep, their hearts lighter than they had been in years. The next morning, they awoke to a message from their parents. A photo of Robert and Emily holding a sign that read, "Coming home soon. Can't wait to hug our stars." Tears filled their eyes as they read the message, their Christmas complete in a way they hadn't thought possible. This year, the echoes of Christmas past had given them a gift they would cherish forever. The reminder that love, in its truest form, transcends time, distance, and everything in between. Please like the video and subscribe the channel.